Hey listeners, Creeparoni here, and I'm just extremely excited to be able to welcome someone to my channel today that I've been wanting to have on for a long time. He's one of the most, I'd say, innovative writers for the creepypasta genre of horror fiction that's out there, and he is the acclaimed author of the Tobit series that I've had on my channel. And so I know a number of people have been contacting me, asking me when I was going to be able to have Tobit and Kellum on. And so I'm so thankful that I have him here today. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Tobit and Kellum and also his new book, which has just been released. It's called Gris Gris and Juju, a New Orleans horror lagniappe. And so let's welcome him to the channel today. So hey, Caleb.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
It's awesome to be here. I've been wanting to do this for a long time myself. I'm glad we finally got together and making this happen.
Me too. And I'm just really excited because, we've done so much work together in a way, but have never actually talked until right now. So it's really neat to finally be able to pick your brain and it not be through text or through like email. So this is really cool.
I'm very excited.
So I wanted to get to know a little bit more about you as a person too, because I know the writer, but not so much the person. So tell me a little bit more about you, where you're from, and how you got into writing.
Well, as most people who are familiar with my work or any of my bios out there, everybody knows I'm from New Orleans. I was born and raised here, and third generation New Orleanian. My grandfather was from Sicily, and my mother was born here. And we kind of just followed in that same kind of. I've kind of referenced it in some of my writing. It's kind of like this New Orleans snobbery almost. And that was definitely part of the upbringing with me. We went to the same schools as our parents did. And those kind of traditions. As far as writing, I mean, there's kind of two tiers to it with me. I've always loved creative storytelling, and that kind of started when I was a kid, and it started with video games. Just anything that I really liked, and I just wanted to expand on the lore of it a bit. I would just sit and I would just draw, it started with pictures, like little comic type things. And eventually that moved into slightly more stylized writing, but it was still just a lot of fan fiction for like whatever video game I liked at the time. And this is, up until I was about probably 13 or 14. And that was kind of the roots there. I've got some funny, embarrassing stories there. My earlier ventures there into writing.
Anything like the unkillable Kenny Leonard? Because I'm getting that vibe from what you're talking about right now.
Oh man, I wish I'd have been as good as him. No, one that stands out, I think I was about maybe like 13, and Mortal Kombat was like my entire life at that time. I still remember, I think it was September 13th of 1993, it was like Mortal Monday when all the games got ported over to like the Super Nintendo. All that. It was just like that was like my Woodstock in the early 90s there. And I remember I wrote a Mortal Kombat story, and I really wanted to like build it into like this series. And I remember there was like one where it was like Mortal Kombat in outer space, and it was like the most embarrassing thing when I think back on it, because it's like Liu Kang punches an astronaut and just steals his helmet, and that's how he gets aboard this rocket. Like nobody questions it, and he gets up into space, and that is something I think if I wish I would have had Kenny's skill at that time. I would have done better than like Mortal Kombat in space. But that was I always reference that when I tell people that are just starting out in writing. I'm like, never be embarrassed, because I wrote Mortal Kombat in space, and I don't think it gets much worse than that.
I think that just shows like how far you've come too. Like everybody has to start somewhere with their ideas, and I know that you kind of looking back in kind of like the horror community, at least from when I started like looking at the creepy stories online that you started maybe with like Jeff, or I don't know if you started with it, but you had done the Jeff the Killer kind of reboot. Like you'd taken something and made it completely like your style.
Oh yeah, Jeff the Killer 2015. That has turned into an entire. That's like the new Tobit going on right now. As much as I hate to say it, I've written a bunch of sequels to it. But that was actually that 2015. That came about a year and some change after I'd already started writing. Like I'd already done like Secret Bar and like a bunch of the Tobits by then, and then I decided to kind of like dip my finger into the Jeff the Killer reboot pool there and see what I could come up with.
Yeah, I think that's cool though, because like you can be versatile with taking a character that's already been, you know, created and characterized, and then you can also create your own universe, you know. So you have like rebooting Jeff the Killer versus like Tobit, which is its own thing entirely. So that's cool for me to see. And I'm wondering, though, how you went from maybe doing video game fan fiction to, like, horror stuff.
Well, horror's always been, like, my thing. Like, I think the video game fan fiction as a kid, I think that was just because that was a comfort platform for me. That was something that I felt, you know, was accessible to my imagination. So, you know, like, the groundwork was already there. It was just a matter of me taking the characters that I liked and kind of doing my own thing with them. No, my actual first attempt, and this ties into Tobit, I was like 17 or 18. I think I usually say 17 because I think that's how old the character was, and I feel like I would have just paired him to my age. But 17 or 18, I tried to write a novel because I had no idea just how difficult writing a novel was. And I was like, I know I can totally do this. And it was like all pen and paper. Like I had this big notebook that I just carried around with me everywhere. And that novel actually, from like 97, 98, became the groundworks for what would eventually be Tobit.
Oh, wow. So Tobit goes really far back. Tobit's not like of this time. Tobit is from beginning in the 90s.
Yeah, Tobit's done some changes, man. The original novel that I was working on back then was called The Grand Occurrence, is the working title. And actually, Joe Montana Saves the Princess is like the fourth chapter from that story that I was able to just kind of convert into like kind of a standalone. But the interesting thing about it was like, the name High Rock Tobit I had come up with back in the late 90s for The Grand Occurrence, and originally he was just supposed to be like the high priest of this cult. Like the whole demon Tobit aspect, Delphia and all that other stuff never was thought up until 2014 when I started writing, you know, more focused on that series. But no, originally the Tobit character was a man. He was a high priest. And when I was writing the demon Tobit of Delphia, like I just needed a name for like this demon. And I never thought that I would dip back into any of the Grand Occurrence stuff again. So I just was like, well, I need a really cool name for a demon. And I'm like, oh yeah, like that one I was using from that book I was trying to write when I was a teenager. Like, yeah, I'll just go with that. Lance Madison was from the Grand Occurrence. Kenny Leonard was from the Grand Occurrence. Obviously, the Joe Montana Saves the Princess characters were from it, except for like Holler and stuff like that. He had to replace Tobit, so Holler became like the new Tobit. And but a lot of those characters I just pulled from that because I had written like 8.5 chapters into this thing back then. So I had all these character names and kind of attributes and ideas already laid out. So I just did a lot of borrowing from that.
That's so interesting to me because I never would have imagined, because I could always read your stuff and always see you reference like your own stories in different ways and in different places. And I didn't realize these were all going back to the Tobit universe and that they had all, I mean, of course I didn't know because we never talked about it before, but it's neat knowing that now that you actually had Tobit first for a lot of these things and then broke off into separate stories and then pulled it all back, or put a lot of things back together to create the actual like big Tobit series.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Oh, wow. So Gris Gris and Juju is more of a collection of a lot of the stories that you've done and conveniently put together in a actual book form, which I love so much because I love to read horror fiction, but like staring at a computer screen to do it like is difficult. So even when I narrate, I usually like print out a copy of the person's story because it's just so much easier to read off paper. So I thought it was great to be able to refer back to your works actually in paper format, nicely bound. What would you say was your inspiration for creating this collection?
Well, I'd been told, constantly, like, well, when are you going to publish? When are you going to publish? That's one thing people was always asking me that. And the issue that I had was, besides the Tobit series itself, I didn't really have anything that was long enough on its own, to be a full book. I mean, you can publish on Amazon, you can do like, novellas and novelettes and stuff like that. But I wanted to, if I was going to put something out there in print, for people to buy, I wanted it to be like a whole book. So I was just really racking my brain on, like, do I sit down and try to generate like this, a novel just to publish? Do I try to get Tobit published? And then it just occurred to me, well, like, I can just publish the works that I have as an anthology. So that's what I was like, I got these are sitting there, and let me just get these in print and publish the one. So pretty much it was like almost my entire like portfolio that I had online that I just converted into book form, and it was enough content to make like a decent little anthology novel.
Yeah, it's nicely sized, I would say. I don't like things that are way too thick. And also what I liked about it, like I'm a huge short story person. I love Tobit. I like that it's broken up into several different sections that I could attack at one time. Attack at different times. But I tend to be the type of person that enjoys things that are like short and I don't know if it's my attention span or what, but I liked how they're short stories. And even when I read authors like Stephen King, or Joyce Carol Oates, like I prefer their short stories to their longer works, usually. So I like that you did that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm a big fan of anthologies myself, and I think it does kind of tie into, especially just kind of like today's consumption habits. People like Netflix. People like, people enjoy things that they can move to something else, as far as, as opposed to looking at a larger thing and saying, okay, I've got to muscle through this entire ordeal. I think anthologies play well, to kind of today's tastes in literature, film, pretty much everything. So I'm glad I was able to kind of create something that works as a contemporary piece, to what people enjoy reading now.
Yeah, and it's like you're able to take lots of different dips into the same type of experience, but they all have a different flavor. So I really like that about them. Tell me about the meaning behind the name of the anthology.
Well, that was a struggle, man, because I was trying to think of a book title, and that can be one of the most complicated things. There's a lot of stories that I've written that you've read that I didn't come up with the damn title until like the end. And then I was like, I don't even know what to call this thing. But it's like you've finished, you've written the whole thing, and it's like, well, I wanna get it out there. The hard part's over, but what do I call it? And so I actually, I've always said Stephen King is like my idol. Like he is I started writing, The Grand Occurrence even back in the late 90s after I had read Desperation by Stephen King. And I was just so damn inspired by his method and his storytelling that I just wanted to do that too. And so while I was just really brainstorming for something to call this anthology, and that's when I kind of started thinking about the way Stephen King has titled a lot of his anthologies. He has one, like Nightmares and Dreamscapes, everything.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Everything's Eventual.
Everything's Eventual. That was going to be the next one I was about to mention it. And it's like the names are just kind of, they're not specific to anything that's necessarily in the book, except for Everything's Eventual is very specific to one story. But, for the most part, it's just kind of a broad concept. And I wanted something that really spoke to the fact that, I put all of my stories in New Orleans and things like that. So I wanted terms that kind of had an esoteric, kind of kind of feel to them, while at the same time also had a very Louisiana-centric kind of name. So, and could kind of play on that vague book title. So, Gris Gris and Juju, that just kind of seemed right, because those are both terms that are frequently associated with, like, voodoo, things like that, which are very much associated with New Orleans. So it just seemed, when I finally said it out loud, I was just like, that works. That's a good title. So that is what I went with. And I appreciate you got it. And so many people call it Gris Gris that I'm just like, you know what? Call it whatever you want.
I think that's great in Spanish. I got it. Like I'd actually heard of Gris Gris and Juju before, because of my whole also infatuation with different horror related things, black magic and hoodoo, voodoo, those types of things. So I totally got it. It wasn't lost on me one bit.
All that good stuff. Well, that's good. That's good. Like I was telling you before, before the interview when we was chatting, I said, like, you got a good knack for getting these Louisiana words right, because there's a lot of stuff that I throw in there that I already know, like, somebody's going to probably have to Google that.
Yeah, and I will say that there's definitely times I've had a struggle because, like we were talking about, like, just because we're both from the southern, piece of the U.S., like, we just come from could just be two different planets, really, when it comes to, like, dialect and the words that we use, the way that we say them, our inflections. So when I do your works, I was attracted to them because of the fact that, like, I could probably use my southern accent and, not have to mask too much like I have to do with most of the other works. But then I was realizing, wow, like, I've been to New Orleans before and I know they sound quite different. I know there's, like, a French influence as well and Creole. And so, and the way that you talk too with the D, saying the, like, words like these, but with a D instead, like, even that's kind of foreign to me. And I'm really realizing now, like, how many stories I could have, flubbed by not saying it the way that you're saying it. But, I'm going to forgive myself.
No, you're good on that. You're good on that. You probably did your listeners a big favor because they probably would have been confused as hell. So, you did right.
And I remember doing, Al, was it Al the alligator from Tobit, the really Cajun alligator?
Yeah.
Oh, it was so tough. I will just say that really quickly while we're on the thing of voices. It was so tough. He was one that I had to do, like, many pops and recordings of, because that's a tough accent to do.
Well, you did a great job with it.
Thank you. What are some of your favorites from this particular collection?
From Tobit or from...
From Gris Gris and Juju.
Oh, well, Secret Bar is, like, the first thing I ever wrote as an adult that I put out for, like, public consumption. So I was so nervous when I first, like, made that available because I had no idea what people were going to think about my style of writing. I hadn't even really fully developed a style of writing at the time. So Secret Bar got a lot of praise early on, and I was really, really surprised and really grateful. And that's one of the things that motivated me to keep writing. So, that one definitely, is one of my top favorites. Joe Montana Saves a Princess. I love that one to death just because, like I mentioned before, that was a chapter. That was pretty much an entire chapter condensed into a standalone story from the Grand Occurrence. So there's a lot of great nostalgia in reading that one for me. And The Doctor in the Coffin song is one of the most polished stories.
It's definitely my number one. Like, I've listened to it, my own, like, recording of it, so many different times. And I usually, I don't listen to my own recordings all that much because I do get a little bit, like, critical of myself for, I might have said a word in a weird way or something like that. But that particular one, I listen to over and over and over. Because I just love the whole way that you did it. Maybe I'm biased because I'm in, like, psychology and, Prentice is a psychiatrist. But I think you, like, from my perspective, I think you really did nail a lot of, like, the internal stuff that a psychiatrist goes through when working with a patient. Like, I read it and was like, this is one person who doesn't think we're Dr. Phil, who really, like, gets how, like, in a therapeutic relationship, like, the dynamic, of how we feel towards our clients. I think you nailed that with Prentice.
Thank you. I was really I was really worried about that too, because I'm like, I don't know the inner workings of how psychiatrists, view their patients or their interactions with themselves. Like, I really don't want to go like crazy off, how if somebody who's in that field were to read this, I wouldn't want them to be rolling their eyes like, oh my God, this guy just doesn't get it. So I'm glad to hear that it actually it worked well for a character.
Oh, totally.
That story too, I really like that story because my best friend Mike Rucker, who is somebody who I usually get to read my stuff before I do too much with it, that was the first story that he ever wrote me afterwards and said, "Holy shit, dude, that scared me."
Yeah, it is scary.
And it's like, me and Mike have known each other since our freshman year of high school. It's like the fact that I was able to write something that would scare him, with him being so familiar with how I think and, and how many times we've brainstormed with each other and stuff, that really was like, holy crap, that is a seal of approval right there, if there ever was one. And so yeah, I was super stoked about that. And that story, believe it or not, the whole like song, "Put You in My Coffin."
Oh yeah.
That came from a story that my mother told me when she was a little girl. She heard some song come on the radio and she mistook the lines. And I think there was an original song and it was something like, "I want to put you in my pocket" or something like that, was the actual lyrics. And she thought the guy was saying, "Put you in my coffin." And she totally freaked out. And that was actually the inspiration for that story.
That's great. That's really great. Like, I never would have imagined that that's where that came from. And you did, like, that's one of the other things that I like about this collection, because you can go from, like, a really scary story, which there are some scary stories that are also kind of tongue-in-cheek, like Secret Bar. Like, I know that's got some pretty comedic little pieces in it, but it's also terrifying in some scenes. But then you can go to, like, classic kind of ritual stuff with the Demon in the Mirror trick. And then, like, a feels situation when it comes to Joe Montana Saves the Princess. Like, there's demonic forces, but there's also, like, an undercurrent of, like, emotion going on. And then Love Always, where it's kind of one of those tricky kind of, like, perspective things. You've got a lot of different tastes of stories in here. And then Doctor in the Coffin song, that's kind of got a little bit of feeling, but a lot of scary to it. And then Dinner with Viviana, which is very, like, cheeky and funny, like funny scary. So I like how you went the whole range in your collection.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's just, once again, that goes back to, just getting my inspirations from authors like Stephen King, who could write just bloody body horror if he wants to. Or he can write, stories like Bag of Bones, which was damn near like a love story, and that's just always kind of been, that's the kind of author that I just want to be. Like, I never want to get predictable, and some people can write the best gore, they can write the best horror, and they'll get a scare out of you every time, but it's like, how their stuff's going to end. And I, for one, like, I'm not opposed to happy endings. Like, I think happy endings absolutely have a place. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think if that's the way the story wants to conclude, then that's absolutely the right way to go with it. So I do a lot of that, So I feel like, I do agree. I think it does come out to a nice kind of balanced collection there. You're not going to read the same stories and, and think, okay, it's time for another ending where everything goes sideways and, terrible things happen to good people and in the end, And I do kind of like that about the book, so thank you.
Speaking of, Stephen King, since we're talking a little bit about, like, your process here, the question I need to rephrase a little bit, because I didn't kind of pre-screen this one with you, but I was wondering, like, do you have other influences other than Stephen King, or other, like, I don't know, either, cultural influences or literary influences to your writing?
Oh, man, like, Usually, it's like in the moment inspiration. So it's like, I call it pop horror. I don't really know if that's like an industry term or not, but I want to write some pop horror stuff like Scream Queens when that show was on, or how some of the American Horror Stories seasons are, where it's like, it's horror, but it's also ultra contemporary and, yeah, I really like that. So I get influenced by that.
I see that you kind of try to also move with the culture too, because, what's the story? I don't think it's in here, but there's another story you've done, Queen Justine. I know we talked a little bit about that privately, but, you tend to have your finger on the pulse of whatever is kind of going on with just society. Like I can see that reflected in your works. And I think that's the pop maybe thing that you're talking about, like that you're current with what's going on.
Yeah, and I think like Dinner with Viviana's almost be a good example of like the pop horror, just with the humor and the constant references to like. Well, I reference the hell out of like '90s culture in that story. Like I realize I don't think I ever say what year that story takes place in, but it's like. Almost everything I reference in it is like late 90s culture. And like with Queen Justine, like one of the big inspirations for that was like Law and Order SVU, like those kind of shows where they take, ripped from the headlines, type things that are happening, and they convert those into cinema.
Yeah, and I see like a similar thing with one that I haven't actually gotten around to narrating yet, but I have read several times, which is Hoy Rod. Because it's more of like on the internet forum type. That's one of the reasons I haven't gotten it up yet, because I'm still trying to decide how I want to format the recording. But it has to do with the there's internet. On the internet, people are having sightings of this particular thing, and they're trying to get their questions answered and investigate this, spooky kind of thing going on. And I think that's very similar too. Like it's how we do things nowadays, like with Reddit and stuff.
And I don't think I had written anything up until that point that took place entirely like, from a media perspective. Like everything, all the prose in that story and the dialogue is pretty much either through like the chat room, through the emails, through a newspaper, things like that. I think that was my first one where I kind of went that way, and I'd been wanting to try to create something like that because I had seen it done before and I had seen it done really well, and I was like, that's really cool, I want to try my hand at that. So that was kind of the direction I went in with Horror. And those abandoned overpasses are real, man. Those are really out there on the I-10 between New Orleans East and Slidell. Like, everything I reference in the stories, usually as far as landmarks and stuff go, like, you can find them. You come on down here, they're out there.
I was actually going to ask that if these a lot of these were like from things that you'd seen in your daily life living in New Orleans, and just kind of maybe you saw them and thought, I'm gonna that's inspired me in some way, I'm gonna write something about that or include that in something that I'm currently writing about.
Absolutely. Those overpasses are there. Originally New Orleans East was supposed to expand way out into the bayou out there. And, I think I referenced that in Hoy Rod, where it talks about, like, the oil bust of the 80s. That was all very real. That kind of shut down New Orleans East expansion that was supposed to go all the way out there. They put those overpasses up prematurely, I guess. And they're supposed to, all these subdivisions and everything were supposed to go out there, and it just never happened. So the overpasses are still there. The exits are still there, but if they've got them like barricaded off, and of course now they're all overgrown and broken up. But if you were to go out there and like try to traverse it, all it would do is just take you in a loop. You'd wind up going back over the overpass and loop back to the interstate again.
Yeah, we have one of those that's like kind of close to where we live, and there's an overpass that was built, and it doesn't actually, like, they built it with the idea that they were going to make some kind of connection with another highway, and it just never got finished. I guess they decided it wasn't actually something worth finishing. And so it's really spooky to like pass by and be like, there were these plans for things, but now it's just a road to nowhere. Like if you go far enough down there, it doesn't actually connect to anything at all. So that is kind of spooky in a way. And when you were talking about that actually reminded me of Everything's Eventual, because Stephen King had said how he got the title for that and his muse for that which was seeing this guy randomly pour a whole bunch of change into a sewer. And that's how he got like the muse to be able to write that story about this guy getting these checks and these money and having to pour it. Can't have any extra, so he pours it in drainage thing. So I can see like totally where you line up with the same kind of processes that maybe Stephen King uses.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm trying to think, like, I mean, I remember Stephen King wrote this short story, and I don't remember which book it was in, but it was where this, like, red pickup truck just inches closer to this guy's window every night, and eventually, like, the truck eats him or something, and, King got inspired for that, because he said he was just driving down, like, this country road or something like that, and there was this broken down red pickup truck out in this field, and, like, he just got this idea to write a story about it, and, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've really put out there that was inspired by something that mundane. I mean, I guess the Hoy Rod with the overpasses, is kind of like that. It's just something that you see all the time, and there's kind of a story there, and that's what I always tell people. Like when it comes to those kind of like little mundane inspirations, like if there's a story there, you're gonna kind of know it, and you'll just kind of go from there with it.
I think that's smart. Like, I don't know. I feel the same way. I see stuff all the time, and I always think of like, well, how did that get to be, or what was the purpose? And then sometimes it goes off into some kind of like, like a bad direction, like something nightmarish. Or
there you go. And just like that, you've started a creative process.
Yeah, I started so many times, and then I think what's lacking is the discipline to be able to make it go into anything. But I do love to imagine and love to live in that kind of inner world of possibilities. So even if I don't write it out, it's still sometimes fun to just mentally explore.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I've done that with a lot of stuff, and it's not been able to really flesh out into prose. And that's the thing. I always tell people, really at the heart of things, I'm just a storyteller. That's, I write because that's how you make it portable. But, my true passion is just storytelling. If I could just be some guy that just travels around and just like sits on a stump and tells stories, I would do that. But sadly, I can't be everywhere at once, so I gotta.
I know. I was thinking we have so many stumps around here that you can do that. Like,
I always have a place to sit.
Yeah, and I think that also is something that's really driven me to enjoy your work, is that it's so similar to how my particular, I guess sociocultural, thing is also based on storytelling. That's a big deal. Growing up, we were always listening to stories about like just scary things, and it was oral tradition. Nothing was written down. A lot of people in my family never had any formal education, so I was hearing stories about. I don't know if you've heard about like Poke Salad Annie, which is a monster that kind of lives in this poisonous plant that we have a lot of around here. But like your whole thing is just so similar to what my whole thing, or my growing up, and my it just resonates with me.
And I think really is like what really got me to kind of find the vibe for it. When I was in the military, it's like we would go out to the field, or we were deployed, and that's one of the few times, in this day and age, where you're not going to necessarily have your cell phone, you're not going to necessarily have, a e-reader or anything like that. And when it's just a bunch of people sitting around, in the Army, we always say, you wait around to wait around, hurry up and wait and all those kind of things. And so there was a lot of downtime, just waiting to move on to the next whatever thing we had to accomplish that day. And that's when I kind of just started telling stories. And it wasn't until, I realized that people were coming to me saying, hey, do you have a story for us? That I said, holy crap, I might be onto something here, because people were tracking me down saying, hey, dude, we're bored. What do you got for us? And I was like, oh, wow. And people are really just enjoying this thing that I typically do for free. So,
Right.
And so that's one of the things that really, I think helped me find my confidence. When you have people that could be off doing something else, but they're coming to you to help them pass the time. They're coming to you for entertainment. that's when you know it's not just sitting around jaw-jacking with your pals, but you're actually creating something there. And to see people enjoying it and to see people engaged with it, that's kind of what told me, all right, dude, you got a gift. You need to do something with it. And, that's what got me in my mid-30s to go back and try to do writing again.
I think that's something that I see still with on my channel. When I see comments a lot of the time, especially on works that you've done, people are so they're like, oh, this person's also mentioned in this story, or hey, it's Jody from the Secret Bar. How many times I've had that same exact comment on my videos before is hey, that's Jody from the Secret Bar.
Oh yeah, with Kenny Leonard and all that stuff.
Yes, and people were just so happy to be able to see some of these characters again. I think you have a real gift for not only telling a good story, but creating characters that people care about, and that which is actually a great way to segue into the next part of what I wanted to ask you about, which is Tobit. That's something that for the both of us, I think, has been kind of a really wild ride, because there's so much of it. It's a huge universe with these fantastic characters. And I know when I get questions, and when I said on one of my recordings that I was going to have an interview with you and to send me, questions, most questions are about Tobit. So I know a lot of listeners are really curious about your process for writing it, which we've talked about. But they're also really curious about, any plans that you have for Tobit down the line.
Okay, yeah. So, we talked about, kind of the origins of it with that. Originally, the Demon Tobit Adelphia was supposed to be a standalone story. That was never... And even when I did Love and Hot Chocolate, that was supposed to be it. And it wasn't until I did, The Bleeding Sky that I was like, all right, I'm going to... And even when I wrote Bleeding Sky, that was supposed to be a 3-part thing. It was supposed to be Bleeding Sky, and then the one with the brothers, and then the third, whatever came next, was going to be, the end of it. And, it was just one of those things that just kept going. I'd write the next piece, and then I was then I decided to give Madison a chapter. And it's okay, and then the Sisters of Tobit kind of got brought in at the end of that. And then before I knew it, it went 12 installments long instead of I guess what would have, if you count the first two, it would have been 5. So as far as more Tobit, well, you'd mentioned the Jeff the Killer stuff earlier. Mm-hmm. So Derek Reynolds is a support character in the current Jeff the Killer series. I have brought him back. So if you're jonesing for some Derek Reynolds, he's there. I've brought his character up into the current, so people can find out what he's been doing since the last Tobit series. I've thought about doing another Tobit series, yes, but based off of Lacey and what she's done since the end of it.
That would be really cool. That would be surprising. I think that's what I like so much about it, is that you gave all these characters their own chance to share their backgrounds in different ways. You didn't just introduce these characters and we don't get to know much about them except for what their actions are in the plot or anything like that. We actually, for each pivotal character, get at some point from their perspective, and we also get their backstory too, which makes it so much more personal, and you get so invested in a particular character, or in many different ones in my case.
Well, and that's good. I like the fact that everybody can kind of have their favorite, but at the same time, every character does have their own story to tell. They all have a reason for being there, and that's another, Stephen King inspiration, in my writing. He does a lot of rich character development, even characters that he will bring in and have them whacked within, the next chapter.
I know,
You'll still know so much about them, and it does mean so much more to me as a reader, I know, when I understand this character. At least, even if I don't agree with why they're doing things, at least I know that there's some kind of mechanism in play.
Yeah, and it makes it like a little bit more ambiguous too, like especially like in a moral and ethical kind of way. Like you can start listening and you're like, okay, so we know that Tabitha is definitely bad news bears. But then when we get to the shack and we learn like Tabitha's got this like crazy trauma history, you in turn, like, you know, she's kind of bad, but then you start to like sympathize and you start to like know that there's a little bit more to her than just being this like bad A female, you know?
Exactly. And that's like,
I really like that.
I try to avoid having like pure antagonist and pure protagonist. I like the idea that everybody's more or less an anti-hero or an anti-villain. You know, yeah, you're always going to have some characters like Pinkerton that are just they were just born naughty. There's just, there's nothing you can really do about that. I think you do have to sometimes have those absolute characters to kind of keep the moral goalposts up there somewhere.
Yeah, and so it can have like a clear like direction that everything's moving in.
Right, and I think with Tobit, like, Claire was kind of like, that pure protagonist, and Pinkerton was kind of like that pure antagonist, but everybody kind of in the middle was, they all had their own reasons, even the ones that you thought were like the pure good guys, and so much of that stuff was like, just like on a whim, man. Like, having Gregory Leary go join, with Tobit's group in the second last chapter, that was never supposed to happen until, like, I literally wrote it. It just hit me. I was like, what can I do with this dude? Like, I've dumped him in this city now, and it's like, the Gregory character, there's no way he could be a victim. Like, he just wasn't written to be that way. He couldn't be a captive. He was just one of those guys that he was going to find a way to take over, And
yeah, he definitely seemed to be susceptible to the power trip situation.
Yeah, and it's just like, if I tried to write him up as just another, like hapless, victim there, it just wouldn't have felt right. So I was like, how can this work to where, yeah, he's probably being manipulated to an extent, but he's being like manipulated on his terms,
Yeah, he was complicit. He's really complicit in it.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, that's the thing with Gregory. It's like, he was willing to be manipulated as long as he was being manipulated on his terms. That's the way I thought about it. Like, he knew he wasn't really in charge of a damn thing there. Like, he knew that. But at the same time, he could either be thrown in the dungeon or he could live in the tower. And either way, he knew he couldn't necessarily leave on his own. So he was just like, well, I'm going to put myself in the most comfortable position where I can have the most opportunity to affect change. And I think that's kind of just how I built him at that point. The whole thing with him and Tabitha having a fling together, that was like completely spur of the moment. Like, I wrote her to go, the idea was for her to go up there and talk to him, and then, as inspiration does come in writing, it just kind of hit me at that point. Like, this would be interesting. This would be cool.
Yeah. It felt really natural. Like, it felt like it was just as organic as you just described it. Like, that just seems like, what would happen, especially, chemistry just happening, And I liked that about it, that it just seemed like it really could be.
Yeah, I always say when you know. Like, you really do have to trust your instinct a lot. And you have to trust it to tell you when you're doing it right, but you also have to trust it to know when... it's when you don't have that warm and fuzzy, when it's like, okay, this feels contrived, or this feels forced, or whatever. Like, that's when you're to go, okay, let me back away from that. So when I did like Tabitha and Gregory, it felt right. It was like, yeah, this is coming out of nowhere, this is whatever, but it feels like it should happen. So I knew to leave it in there. I knew that was a keeper.
So what, just for fun, what are maybe your top 3 Tobit characters, and why would you choose them?
Number 1 is definitely Claire Nobles, just because she was inspired by 2 really awesome, I don't know if you've seen the movie As Above, So Below.
I have not.
Great movie. The main character in there, she is kind of just like this Indiana Jones type, and she's just trying to find, like, get down into these Parisian catacombs because she wants to, fulfill. One, it's like it was her father's life mission to find like this philosopher's stone type thing. And two, it's just her natural, it's just the way she just moves forward. She's one of those people that she's just a world eater, she just keeps on going. And that was part of the inspiration for Claire's character and personality. And the other end that makes Claire such a special character to me is that I base a lot of her mannerisms off of my cousin Linda, who is, in a lot of ways, like my best friend. I think we always have like the two kind of best friends. You have like your non-family best friend, and then you have like your cousin best friend or whatever. And my cousin Linda, she's always been like my cousin best friend. And she is just one of the most fearless and bold and intelligent people I've ever met. She's one of those people that, she will tell. It used to drive me crazy when we were younger because she came across like a know-it-all all the time. But I realized later, it's like, no, she really does know what she's talking about. And she's one of those people, like, when you go to her with a question or a problem or something, she's like, all right, here's the solution. Here's how you're going to accomplish it. How, why aren't you doing it yet? And as an adult, I've just come to appreciate that boldness so much. That was another. So I kind of base Claire off of those two. I kind of, composite those two personalities together to get Claire.
Does your cousin Linda know that you were so, like, I guess, enamored with the way that she views the world and approaches the world that you actually made her a protagonist in something that you wrote? She does? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I told her all about that. And then I remember, like, when she read, like, the Doctor in the Coffin song, because a lot of the scenes in that book are based off of actual places we've been. Like, we had family in Grenada, Mississippi. So, like, the house and all of the stuff that's described in that, like, we've both been in that house. So she was like, oh my God, she was another one, like my best friend Mike, that was like, oh my God, that scared the crap out of me because I could, like, picture.
Are you talking about Creepy Granny's house?
Creepy Granny, yes.
Yeah.
She was like, I've been there. I can envision all of the stuff that she described in it. So Claire definitely. Lacey, I just love. Like, the Lacey character, I just loved writing her because she was so chaotic.
She's chaotic and real, like, sociopathic, and it just, she was really fun. She was a fun one to voice, too, because I felt like when I was voicing her that I just very clearly knew in my head what she sounded like.
Oh, and you did a great job. Like, really, I mean, that was her voice. Like, I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I loved writing those kind of characters because you can throw away the whole rule book when you write those kind of characters. But the rule to those characters is there is no rule book, so you're still writing within proper, I guess, creative methodology. But it's just such a free style of doing it. And I just always had so much fun whenever I was writing any scene with Lacey's character in it. Because it was just, I didn't have to worry about, is this going to make sense later? Is this going against the established character and things like that. And geez, I don't know, Pinkerton was a fun character to write. Madison was a difficult character to write for a long time, and then eventually, like, I really labored over that third one, the Madison's backstory chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That one took me forever to.
But so many people were really affected by that one because they would all, like, there's so many comments of, I feel so bad for Madison. Oh, Madison, it just makes me cry. You gave him a lot of depth.
Thank you. And that was another character that, like, if you go all the way back to the Grand Occurrence, there was a Lance Madison character, and he was just like one of Tobit's cronies. Like, I don't think I really gave him much, much to go with in that first story. Then in the Demon Tobit of Delphi, he was just there to kind of be like generic priest guy, and who chases Derek. And then, when I finally decided to go and give him his own chapter, it was like, all right, well, how do I want to make him? And it's just, it just seemed like that the path that I went with him and his life in London before he met Pinkerton, and what would motivate an otherwise sane person to do anything. like the characters, that in the book. So, that was where I kind of went with that. And I also wanted to have a good reason for him to sort of be... That's another reason why I brought Tabitha into it, was to give him a kind of an adversary within the ranks of, the adversaries. And so that's... And Tabitha would probably be the third favorite character. I really enjoyed... That really rejuvenated that series for me, because after the third one, I didn't really know where to go. After Madison's backstory chapters, like, do we just start moving into the end game now? And then when I brought Tabitha in, and Tabitha was actually based off of a Dungeons and Dragons character I came up with. I was DMing a game back when I was in the military, and I came up with this final boss type character, and she was kind of like the generic female assassin, but I really went into like the super short hair and just like the, her ability to kind of just adapt to wherever she is, even if they're traveling to a different time. And that was in kind of the snarky attitude and everything else. That's what kind of built the Tabitha Shaw that we got in the Tobit series. So I would say,
but she is great though. Like, I don't see how I don't see how I could even have a list of just like top 3, because I tend to love like so many of them. But I always imagined Tabitha, I really liked voicing her, and I really liked imagining her like maybe always wearing like Doc Marten boots, but being so agile that like because Doc Marten boots are pretty clunky, but they look really cool.
They do.
But
they are
being so agile, she could still move around really well.
Yeah, that was just kind of like, and I guess that's kind of where like the fantasy aspect of the Tobit story came in, because it's like, how do I explain that these characters are all basically like fucking ripped from Kill Bill, I mean, I have to do something there, and it's like, well, that's where the fantasy magic kind of, eternal youth within that city comes in. It's like they have all this time to perfect their skills. So, there it is. That doesn't feel too contrived. It's not just like, generic, badass, fighters. No. So I feel like it all came together pretty nicely.
It totally did.
Thank you.
And like I said, I can't really choose top 3 because there's just so many great characters. But off the top of my head, I have to say definitely Lacey was one of the ones that always came up in conversation when I'd be talking about Tobit. Also Tabitha, because she's kind of the ringleader for so much of it, and I liked that she has that ability to just be so commanding and scary at the same time. Let's see if the gooder characters, the better characters, who did I like? I don't know. I liked. Well, I liked all. I guess I liked them all. Do you see yourself anywhere in Tobit? Like in any of the characterizations that you made?
Oh God, no. No, I think I don't think I would characterize myself. I mean, I don't know. I think there was like, like some background character that got killed immediately. Like that would be like the me of the Tobit universe there. No, I don't think I really dipped into myself too much. I mean, I think we all do that when we write. Like we all kind of ask ourselves, what would we do, in that situation, to make it kind of real, obviously. But I didn't stylize. I don't think I've ever stylized any character off of myself, with the exception of the main character in Secret Bar, and that was just because I based that entire story off of like how I felt when I was 21, and I realized just how boring, being 21 actually really was once you got past like the crazy blackout drunk birthdays and all that. But once you actually got to like regular living, it's like this isn't the next level of life that I was led to believe. But that's about it. I mean,
that's so different then from Stephen King, because that's a common joke about his writing is that he's always it's always from his perspective. For the most part, his his narrators for his books are his own voice, and him putting himself in all these situations. And then I always imagine, like, does does Caleb see himself like as a Derek Reynolds or a Kenny Leonard, or like I was always wondering
I'd probably be closer to Kenny than any of them, maybe. But now I'll tell you the main character in Dinner with Viviana. Now that I don't think I was as dorky as him, but a lot of the stuff that they did that I referenced in that story was stuff that me and my friend Mike Rucker did. In fact, I even call his best friend in that story Ike Ruddock, which is a play on Mike Rucker. And us sitting up talking about like Final Fantasy 3 all night long, that was real stuff that we did in high school. Like, we both had that game like in 95, and we were both obsessed with it. And we would sit up on the phone and talk like for hours about like secrets in that game, or stuff that we'd found, or stuff that we were trying to find. I used to make up so much shit and be like, dude, I found this secret where you can do this, and like it never happened, but you know, I'd always try to see if I could get him to try to go for it. The Stone Cold Steve Austin head reference was an actual event that happened with us. There was a line in that story where they get kicked out of Toys R Us for making the talking Stone Cold head say "shake them titties," and we really did that. And I don't think we got kicked out, but we were both. I'm still a big wrestling fan. Like, I'm a WWE like freak. I watch it every Monday, every Tuesday. I watch the pay-per-views. I love wrestling. And in like the late 90s, me and Mike were both really into wrestling. I don't think he's as into it now as he used to be. But we used to put on fake matches with each other. And it wasn't like backyard wrestling where we tried to like actually do the moves, because we weren't that stupid. But we did put on like these choreographed storylines and stuff like that. So one night we decide we need to go get the belts, because you could buy like these plastic like WWE championship belts.
Yeah.
And so we decided to go to Toys R Us. And we're both like 18, 19 years old at the time. We're going out there buying these plastic belts. And this was when, like, the WWE Attitude Era was, like, sweeping the nation, and, like, they were just everywhere. And we were in Toys R Us, and they had these Stone Cold Steve Austin heads that... Remember those parrots from back in the day? Like, those parrot toys, and you could hold the button down? And it was basically like that, but in Stone Cold form. And... like, I walked up to one and I just pushed the button. I was, like, trying to think of something funny to say. And I was just, like, shake them titties into this thing. And so they had this... we didn't know they were motion activated. So they had, like, this Nintendo 64 display set up right there, which, of course, had, like, a WWE, which I think was still WWF at the time, game set up in there. And so we're standing there playing it. And as we're doing it, we have the head sitting right there. So every time we're moving, we keep setting this thing off. And it just kept repeating that line over and over again. And we just laughed. Like, we just could not stop laughing about it. So I worked that into the Dinner with Viviana story with the Final Fantasy 3 stuff. And I'm sure there were some other likenesses to my youth that could be drawn from that story as well.
I think that's probably where some of the best things come from, though. Like, the more, like, the things that were really funny that actually happened in a person's life, rather than making up things that you thought you might be funny. It's actual stuff that you did experience and know from experience is funny.
And I do a lot of that in my writing. Like, a lot of the stuff that I slip in there is stuff for very specific people. Like, so a casual reader will just see it as part of the prose, but I can reach out to somebody like, hey, totally check that part out. You know, you're going to find something in there for you. And they will find it and be like, oh, holy shit, I see what you did there. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that in there.
I will say, going back to Gris Gris and Juju, that there is something for everybody. Like, it reminds me so much of, like, and this is my own nostalgia thing that maybe, I don't know how many listeners can relate to, but being back in the 90s and being part of, like, the Goosebumps fan club and being able to, like, get the books, and you have, like, all these, not just one book, but say, like, my favorite ones, of course, were always the R.L. Stine anthologies, where it would have, like, lots of shorter stories, 10 spooky tales or 10 chilling tales or whatever. And so this so reminded me of that, because I have so many of the ones that R.L. Stine did, and I have ones of, all different authors at the time, but it really, like, brings me back, like, to, it's like a adult version of, like, one of those Goosebumps books to me. I don't know, it's being able to go back and experience that same kind of feeling, but with contemporary stuff that fits my age level.
Well, that's awesome. There you go. So, see, there you go.
It's my nostalgia kick.
Get your nostalgia kick and get some scary stories, and all rolled into one convenient little package.
Yeah, and it's just it's written to me. It echoes so much from those things, because you would have a story that was really scary, and then a story that's more funny, and then a story that has more feeling to it. Like just a lot of different flavors. So it's kind of like a buffet, and you can just have a lot of different types of things. And so I think it's a great book, and I would recommend everybody listening to go out and get a copy. And I will definitely be having a link in the description of this video to where you can just easily click and go get your own copy.
And I second that motion. Yes, go buy the book.
Yes, for as much as we've been able to for free enjoy your efforts, I think it's not a large jump to say like, hey, go and get like a for real copy of this, because it feels good to have in your hands. It's convenient to have it at bedtime. It's something you could take, and if you were on like maybe a trip or something and you only had a minute of, well, I'm bad about that. Like I always have to have a book with me every time I go somewhere, and I like to read just a little bit at a time, because you never know, you might be at the dentist's office or at the doctor's office, or waiting on somebody to meet up, and you're just sitting in your car. You have a few minutes to read something short. That's what I like to do. So it's a convenient kind of read too.
Oh, awesome. And I appreciate you saying that. It is available in Kindle edition and paperback, and I got it set up to where if you buy the paperback, you get the Kindle for free. So you've always got it.
And do you have, any things that we can look forward to in the future?
Well, I am still pushing my way through this Jeff the Killer series thing. So that actually has a bit of a following, So, if you haven't checked that out, that's actually, I'm building that portfolio up over on Spin Pasta, because, they're spin-offs, so to speak.
Okay. Well, see, that's one thing I haven't actually read, because I tend to be more based off of like Wikia stuff. And so if it's not a big thing on the Wikia, then I might not have seen it. But I know that you were doing it.
Well, all the links are on my regular Creepypasta Wiki profile. So they'll just link you over to the Spin Pasta site when you click on them. And just like with Tobit, they're all set up. If you start at the first one, they got the little next bar at the bottom. You just click to the next story. Keep them all in order. It's just like the Tobit series. If you get them out of order, you're going to be confused.
Yes, very much so. And is there anything else that you'd like to share with anyone about your book or your writing, or just anything at all?
I just tell everybody the same thing. It's follow your passion. Like I said, I think of myself as a storyteller more than a writer, but writing is how we make the storytelling portable. So it's kind of how we have to do it. I always tell everybody, just follow your passion. If you want to do it, just go for it. And maybe you'll discover that it's not something you're that passionate about as you go, but you'll always know that you tried. And you might find just this great resource that you just never knew was there. And so I always say just go for it. Don't be afraid to go for it. And if you ever hesitate, just keep in mind that I wrote a story about, Mortal Kombat in space when I was a kid. And my world did not end. So, go for it. Write what you want. And don't worry about what people are going to think. Just do it. And you never know. I didn't know what people were going to think was Secret Bar. I had no idea. And then it turned out to actually kind of kickstart me into writing a lot more.
And I, want to speak on behalf of a lot of people on my channel, and especially myself, but to say, thank you for just being, such, I'd say, an innovative creator when it comes to this type of fiction, because it's not all, I don't want to call it traditional creepypasta, because it's not. But it is, in some ways, it has those elements, but you've just elevated them to, I would say maybe a gourmet kind of pasta.
Oh, thank you.
For only the most discerning
I like that.
Readers. And thank you for being open enough to allow me to participate in that and to really like feel out your work and to share it with other people.
Oh, and I appreciate that beyond words. I always say you're the voice of my fiction, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I trust you to do anything that I've written. 100%. You've always knocked everything out of the park. You've elevated my own, writing. You say you listen to your own recordings sometimes. I will listen to your readings of my stuff on long trips quite a bit, and I learned to appreciate my own writing so much more through that.
Oh, that makes me feel like I want to cry. Well, thank you very, very much. That means a lot to me. And thank you so much for being available to be on my channel and have us pick your brain. And it's been so great to be able to learn more about you since I've read so much of your stuff, but being able to actually talk to you about it has just really increased my respect level 10,000% for what you do.
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everyone who's taken the opportunity to listen to this. Please, like this and share it with people that you think might like to read K-Ban and Kellum's work or to listen to what he has to offer. Leave some comments on maybe what is one of your favorite K-Ban and Kellum stories so we get a good idea of what you like. And thank you so much for listening. And I'm sure that there'll be more in the future. I do have another story of K-Ban and Kellums to record and release for y'all. So just be on the lookout for that. And if you haven't already, please click the link in the description, take a look at his work, and consider purchasing it to support this author who's done so much for the community that we're all a part of.